The thing on the threshold. When the confirming ding resounded between her ears, Matilda ruminated on the fact that it always drummed up the same feeling of dread within her. Why, she couldn't rightfully say, but she likened it to the dread she felt when she was on her own, knowing that she woke up every day with no prospects or new leads to carry her down the road toward career success and a family. The ding in her head was a reminder of that ticking clock in her life, that she was gifted with one more day to make a connection, but the system and the receiver in everyone's skull would prevent her from ever progressing. Something was different about this day, Matilda could be sure. Looking around at the graveyard shift reception desk and computer monitor set up in front of her, with all of its security camera postage stamps, told her that it was just another night and another dollar. It was just her in the lobby, as with every night, and she could at least be thankful that it wasn't like her first nights on the job, when the elderly patients were up and about after hours and she was required to summon up enough authority in her to calm them, come down to their level, and then lead them back to bed. Once she proved to herself that she could do the hard parts of the job, the patients stopped leaving their beds at night, as if they trusted the young college student keeping watch of their door. Or maybe they didn't trust her and were afraid to confront her in the night. Either way, it made for a quiet graveyard shift, and she would need a little bit more excitement to stay awake, while all the rest of the world was asleep, and Sudoku puzzles were not doing it for her. Ordinarily, she would just overload her guts with steaming coffee rather than logging on to the Connect 2 system. Like most teens growing up with social technology, she had tooled around with the skull-to-skull technology, but she only needed to navigate the downtown streets to know who most of the customers were. Anyone new to her city might look at the vast amount of vagabonds carrying on intelligent conversations with themselves as they pushed their grocery carts down the street, and they would think the social fabric was unraveling. Although Matilda would agree with that testimony wholeheartedly, she knew that the vast majority of those homeless men and women were on board the Connect 2 system and were speaking with their remote pen pals, friends from other parts of the planet that the system had paired with them, to share their head and thoughts for the rest of the day, or the rest of their lives, if they were compatible enough. Connect 2 was released on the aftermath of depressive cases sweeping Matilda's city, and loneliness was the major culprit. Matilda's job prevented her from meeting people, at least anyone her age, so she was willing to kill the boredom any way she could, even if that meant she would be paired with one of those sorry souls living in the gutter outside her door. She often fired up the Connect 2 receiver in her skull by plugging the adapter into the permanent earpiece attached to the side of her skull, as everyone else did. She used the adapter and its separate controller to log into the internet and select the Connect 2 server. Often she scrolled through the names and professions of all the current users but could never pull the trigger, as she was looking for someone like her, she supposed, working some night shift and bored off her tits, looking for a new best friend. But, like usual, most of the users had men's names and they hadn't bothered to list their professions, which told her they were most likely living in the tent cities just 20 minutes down the main street from her. She didn't really want to share her headspace with a man, as she had never done that before, and even though there were plenty of fail-safes to block any user and excommunicate yourself from the system with the touch of a button, she considered herself to be a sensitive and an empath, and her encounters with miserable and tortured people in person were enough to leave bad impressions and traumas on her person. So she wondered what a tortured soul could do to her from within. She shuddered at the thought. But on this night she was willing to roll the dice, as there was a name she found listed with his current profession, and she was able to deduce right away that this man was at his job like her, and the night was still young. It wasn't the fact that he was a graveyard shifter like her that she finally selected his name and sent an invitation to connect. No, it was the profession he had listed under his name. He worked at the Sacrum Institute, which had gained a reputation in the city for operating in the Black Ops programs, working with military intelligence groups. No one really knew what the firm did, as they seemed to work with marketers and psychologists to introduce the greatest new fad medicine, but it didn't seem that they were just a research lab for pills, as they also raised and engineered livestock, developed TV packages for news channels to feature their new products, participated in oil spill cleanups and humanitarian efforts, and even built rockets that they shot up into space. Matilda wondered what they didn't do, but she also knew that anyone who worked for Sancrum signed an NDA. She'd heard that from a family member who used to work there, who likened it to a Freemason kind of brotherhood that he would never betray for threat of incarceration. Matilda had the sense that the repercussions were much worse than that, just judging by the twinge of pain that had been alive on her great-uncle's face when he spilled the beans to her. "Hello, is this Matilda?" a sunny and youthful male asked in her ears. Her shoulders immediately relaxed to know that this man was young. Hadn't her pre-teen friends and her first signed on to that program to meet boys? Isn't that why anyone would let someone into their own heads with them? "Yes, is this John, from Sancrum?" she replied out loud. Although Connect 2 could transfer silent thoughts between participants, it was safer to drown out the thoughts and feelings with actual words. She didn't want to give away how flushed she was at that moment, for instance, even though she wondered whether it was apparent in her voice. "Ah, I see I got someone's attention with that," John replied with an audible chuckle. "You know, most people skip over my name when they see Sancrum listed. Everyone's interested in speculating about the rumors on the web, but the moment they get a chance to meet someone beyond the curtain, they shy away. The conspiracy has a much bigger weight than what I can ever shed light on." "So you're saying all the stories are bunk, then? You aren't working with off-world entities?" "I can tell by your voice you're making a joke," John replied. "Would I be on this platform if my job was that exciting?" Matilda laughed. "I suppose not. You working an 8-hour?" "I'll be doing a double," John replied. "I'm on my last leg now." "Oh, wow, so you're safe to talk, then?" John paused, and they both heard static in their skulls. "I'd like to know what you do first, if I could. Tell me about your interest in your job, Matilda. Can't be all that bad." "Oh, I like it just fine," she said. "I just man the reception desk while all of our elderly residents are sleeping. I work at an old folks' home." "That must be very rewarding. I respect that very much, Matilda," John said. "I'm working a double right now, so I have enough to support my grandma at home." "It's wonderful to hear, John. My grandma is my favorite person in the world." "What's her name?" "Maxine," John said with pride. "I'd love to give back to her and her friends with a job like yours. You have to tell me more. Give me the exciting details." Matilda laughed again. "Not a whole lot of excitement here tonight, or any night for that matter, John. The people who live here are the sweetest ever." "There has to be someone manning the reception desk for a reason," John proposed. "There must be something you provide that no one else can." "Well, if you want to go woo-woo with me, I've been kept on my toes a few times," Matilda ventured with the same light-hearted tone. "Sometimes I'll see the front doors open themselves and catch a hint of someone passing around a corner. None of the residents ever seem to leave, even after they die. I kind of treat them as our secondary clientele. So I'll wave and greet them when the front doors open by themselves. I figure they're just coming in from a midnight walk, which they were never allowed to take when they lived here. I don't blame them at all, and I'll even joke with them that their secret is safe with me." Matilda was met with a surge of fear and pain through her skull that she'd never experienced before, and it left her reeling, gripping the edge of her desk and watching the room spin as she hung on for dear life. As soon as it passed, she was struck with a mental image of an empty cell, cold, white, and luminescent, and she knew that this wasn't her experience but John's. "John, is everything all right?" Matilda asked. "Yes," he said calmly. "I'm here. Did we disconnect for a minute? I was just going to say how creepy all that sounds. Your job is more exciting than you give it credit for." "I just saw something," Matilda said, shaking her head as if to dislodge the thought. "It was a cell, but it was empty. Why is it so scary?" "If it wasn't for these devices we were born with, I would swear you were a mind reader," John said. "I'm connected with all my emergency contacts, like I'm sure you are, and I've never had them pick up on visual thoughts from my head before. With the kind of work I do, I would be in big trouble for even talking to you right now as I am. I guess I understand now." "Sorry, I didn't mean to pry," Matilda said. "My friends call me an empath because I can feel everything they do, even before they tell me what's happening in their lives. They don't like to share with me here in Connect 2 for that reason." "Well, that's a bit embarrassing then," John said. "Here you are, describing your encounter with the spirit world, and you have no fear at all. In fact, you're comforted because they're good ghosts. I didn't know good ghosts existed. But I would take a sweet old lady any day over... I'm sorry, We don't have to talk about it, Matilda cut in. She wasn't sure she wanted to explore that cell any further with John anyway. I have one job, Matilda, and that's to watch this cell at the end of the hall. The glass walls are polarized, so I'm not allowed to see inside most of the time. Sometimes I've peeked in through one of the chinks in the glass, but that cell's always been empty. You watch over an empty cell? All night? They tell me it's not empty, is the thing, John said, his voice hushed now. I feed whatever it is twice a night, but the meat I feed it is incinerated to ash. When I drop it into the cell, it's always gone the next day. Of course they won't tell me what it's all about, so I can only speculate. What kind of animal would eat meat turned to ash? Matilda asked. Animal? I'm not so sure about any of that, John answered cautiously. The qualifications for the job were extensive, mostly the health check. I had to be at exceptional health. They won't hire anyone over the age of 40 to work on the floor, and I can only think it has something to do with the meat. The steaks I'm provided here are raw, and even in the fridge, they rot faster than normal. Anything that's already dead rots much faster here. I killed a fly once and watched it shrivel and flake away to nothing, right in front of my eyes. What could it be? Some experiment? I don't ask questions like that. Not around here, Matilda, John said. But I don't think it's alive, at least in the sense that we're alive. How can that be? Says the girl who just told me doors open on their own in her place of work, John shot back, and he wasn't laughing this time. It's the same reason you know your midnight visitors are friendly ghosts. I look at that cell and at the gray hairs on my head, and I don't think it's anything good. As soon as he finished saying that, Matilda yelled out when the automatic doors slid open in front of her desk, stalling there a moment for the unseen visitor to step beyond the sensor and then push and closed again. Something wrong? John asked. Matilda stared at the welcome mat, unsure whether she should laugh or spring away from her desk and through the same automatic doors. Don't tell me you just saw something, John cried excitedly. The doors just opened, Matilda heaved. Usually it doesn't surprise me that much, but the fact that we were just talking about it concerns me. It's like they're listening. I guess that's my fault then, John began. Maybe I should... He was cut off by a bang that set off a series of curses on the other end, and loud footfalls down the hall. Then silence. John, talk to me. What happened? He was breathing loudly now, and those waves of fear were fresh, weighing down Matilda's head like torrents of water. Yes, Matilda, I just got startled is all, John said, at the tails of a deep breath. One of the office doors just banged open here. I've never seen that in my life, and whatever just walked in, I felt a cold wind go past my desk, going down the hall, and I had to run the other way. Down the hall? You think? I wish I had your same conviction, John said. You can't watch a door open and... You can watch a door open and know it's one of your residents, but here, how can I trust anything I can't see? Matilda found that she was still staring doubtfully at the welcome mat in front of the front doors, somehow aware that she was still being watched, and it didn't feel friendly, not this time. I don't know if I could ever be sure, Matilda breathed. I just assumed, but... Oh, God, John cried. The polarized glass, it's gone. I can see inside. What? John, what's happening? Matilda was standing upright now. Hold on. More scuffling feet. Good Lord. It's freezing, Matilda. Does it get cold like this for you? Before Matilda could respond, she heard a loud click, and there was no ignoring the sound of a large and sticky door swinging open. John screamed then, and the sound of the opening door receded as he no doubt sprinted to the other end of the hall, his footsteps thundering against the wall. Matilda felt sick to her stomach, and she doubled over, smelling the rotten meat in her nostrils and listening to the man's loud wheezing in her ears. Your ghost! John screamed. It opens doors, not just the lobby ones? What? My ghost? What are you... It's open! He yelled, still running, still hyperventilating. Then the loud alarms cut off the rest of the background noise, and when Matilda closed her eyes, she could see the red lights flashing from the bulbs in the ceilings. An old lady? John shrieked. She's laughing at me. Jesus, she's in here with us. Don't you hear her laughing? Grandma Max, she's screaming. Don't touch her. A loud door slammed on the other end, muffling the sirens, and the sound of echoing footsteps told Matilda that he was running down a stairwell now, and what replaced the alarm sounds were clearly the wicked laughter of a woman, somewhere riddled in the static of the Connect 2 device, and the far-off screams of countless elderly men and women. And was that her own grandma she was hearing now? She heard an actual moan down the hall from her, from one of the closed rooms, and she rounded around her desk to poke her head down the dimly lit passageway. As soon as the moan came again, but from a different room across the hall, Matilda heard John squeak to a halt on his rubber soles, screaming at the top of his lungs as something loud cracked and something else spilled across the floor. Before the connection between both of their skulls was severed with the same audible ding that connected them, Matilda saw an image of the olive-eyed beast, no longer invisible and very solid. It was there on the final step of the stairwell, albino-skinned, hairless, and hunched forward on long appendages that ended in blade-like claws. Its pumpkin-shaped head reared up in her mind's eye, seeming to recognize that there were two of them sharing that headspace, and when its claw shot forward to extract John from his own skull, they went scratching around in there for her, and she had already evacuated, ripping the earpiece from the side of her head in a torrent of warm blood. Bursting into the nearest room, the moaning had changed to blood-curdling screeches, and before Matilda could press the emergency button on the wall and call in backup, the old man in the bed had already noticed her and pointed a gnarled finger at the farthest ceiling corner. She could see the albino thing dancing in the man's wavering, bulging eyes, so she didn't have to look up to know that they were no longer alone. It was ready to feed, but perhaps not on her bones, she could only hope there in her last moments. It fed on things that were already dead or near death. Then she looked down at her shirt front at the bright red stain spreading there from the wound in her ear, and she knew she was already there. She breathed herself in the end and looked up at the olive eyes and open oval of a mouth, sucking up the dead air, dust, and skin like a vacuum, and knew that she had brought it there, and it told her in her mind that it would feed on her last, even as its claws still dripped with John's crimson lifeblood, smearing against the ceiling plaster as it readjusted itself for purchase in its perch. Matilda thought she could hear the screams in her head. There was only one way to sever that connection, the thing told her, and she begged for it, dropping to her knees. But she knew she'd have to hear it all for a little while longer. The pleas and cries of the gentle soul she'd cared for over her last year on the job, and she'd have to hear the last gasping cry of each one before the sun could return. She pictured the cell in her mind's eye, attempting to push the creature inside, but all she managed to do was shut the white glowing door on herself. At least the screaming had stopped. At least she was no longer bleeding, and she wouldn't have to inspect her own blood-streaked arms and legs anymore, as they were now invisible. She settled down on the floor in a ball, staring up at the burning white light above her head, and wondered when dinner time was.